We have, I don't know if you guys remember that, but we have a tradition at B-Sides. We have a shot. Sometimes they do it after. We do it before because it helps people deal with the stress. But it's not compulsory. If you don't like alcohol, then we can give you other things. A special pink juice.
Pink cocktail.
Yes. Cheers.
Cheers! To our very first speaker! Yes! Give it up for her!
Good morning, everyone. Let's get this party started. Thank you so much for coming out. My name is Eva Galperin. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity for the Electronic Frontier Foundation and also the head of EFF's Threat Lab, which concentrates on producing research that protects especially vulnerable populations all over the world. So I am here to talk to you about one such project that was non-consensually foisted upon me by the universe, about fighting spouseware and stalkerware. So in order to properly understand the background of this horrible situation, we must go back in time. It's very timey-wimey. To what I call the before time, or 2017. So way back in the before time, in 2017, I had spent several years doing security research, specifically research on APTs targeting journalists and activists. Back in like 2010, 2011, it was still news that that there were APTs that were not Five Eyes, Russia, China, or Israel. People were very excited to learn this. It was also news that these APTs were targeting journalists and activists, and so there was a lot of work to do. Unfortunately, at the end of 2017, I discovered that one of my research partners, with whom I had done many years of this research and published many papers, was a serial rapist. So, oops. And I was mad, a little bit, and I did what most people do when they get mad. I tweeted. And, okay, really just me. So what happened was I'm sitting there and I'm reading an interview with one of his victims. And the interviewer, the journalist, asks his victim, "What took you so long to come forward? It was, it's been many years. This is a really horrific story. It sounds like a really bad guy. Why didn't you say anything earlier?" And she said, "I didn't speak up because he was a hacker, and I was scared. He threatened to compromise my devices. I didn't know what was safe. I didn't know what he would be able to do to me if I spoke up." And when I read this, I was furious. And so I went to the Twitters. And I tweeted, "If you're a woman who has been sexually abused by a hacker who threatened to compromise your devices, contact me and I will make sure they are properly examined." So I thought that this was just sort of a, random angry tweet, and maybe I would hear from one or two people. It was really no big deal. I was just gonna vent my spleen. No. So approximately 10,000 retweets, and God knows how many emails later, I had a project on my hands. And that was no fun. So I was getting somewhere between 0 and 12 contacts a day, mostly made up of people telling me about the worst thing that had ever happened to them. The victims were mostly women. The abusers were mostly men. But there were also cases of women abusing men, of abusive same-sex couples. I had one case in which a man came to me because his ex-boyfriend had outed him as gay to his extremely conservative Korean family. So there were all kinds of things that I saw over the course of my Let's go with involuntary research. And it turns out, as with most research projects, that my original assumptions about what it was that people needed were wrong. Most people that came to me were not suffering from device compromise. Most people didn't need forensics. Sometimes it was a scam. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the email scam going around in which a stranger sends an email saying, I have installed a rat on your machine, and I have seen you masturbating, and I have recorded this, and I'm going to send it out to all of your contacts to your eternal shame. This is bullshit. It is a scam. Please don't send that person Bitcoin. And so I was contacted by a lot of people who had these things and just like couldn't tell whether or not this was legitimate. Most often, what I saw was account compromise. Basically, if it had a login, it was compromised. Email, Google Drive, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, WhatsApp, Apple IDs, TikToks. I had to figure out what a TikTok was. I am an old person. We don't have these things. It's like Vine, only slightly longer. So I spent some time thinking that the problem was device compromise. The problem was not device compromise. It was almost always account compromise. And the good news is that we have advice for account compromise. Account compromise is reasonably well understood. And so if someone comes to you and says that they're concerned about account compromise, you tell them, change all your passwords, use a password manager, turn on the highest level of two-factor authentication that you're comfortable using. Now, I know that I'm about to get a whole bunch of well-actuallys from the audience about how you should never use SMS 2FA and everybody should be carrying YubiKeys around at all times. Listen, I agree with you. I do. But I also believe very strongly in harm reduction. If I am talking to a group of people who are not comfortable using YubiKeys or who can't spend 40 or 50 bucks on a YubiKey, or who can only, sort of wrap their mind around 2FA SMS, it is better than nothing. And so following the harm reduction approach, you meet people where they are, not where you think that they should be. And certainly, if they're not where you think they should be, you don't tell them, well, you just don't deserve security. Clearly, your partner should be able to spy on you wherever you go and whatever you're doing. So the bad news is that sometimes it really is a rat. A very small fraction of the cases that I looked at involved actual rats, but they were also the most disturbing. They were usually the ones that were linked to long-term harassment, to physical threats, to physical violence, to kidnapping, and all kinds of really disturbing abuse, including weirdly financial abuse. It turns out also that rats were usually not on devices that hackers had threatened to compromise, because it turns out that hackers are lazy, and hackers are also usually kind of cowardly. And so often what they would do is they would threaten to compromise a device in order to maintain a certain amount of control without actually having to install a rat. But in the cases where a rat was installed, usually you didn't see that kind of threat because the hacker didn't want to tip his victim off. He wants to maintain access. So you don't see that particular type of control there. And one thing to note is that abusers lie about their capabilities all the time. It helps keep the victims feeling confused and powerless when they don't know the shape and the limits of the abuser's surveillance. So here I am, looking like Brie Larson, hair flowing in the wind. And I had so many emails and so many messages every day from people telling me the worst thing that had ever happened to them. And I just plodded through it like I was the universe's help desk and started to help one person at a time. Now, this is not efficient. This is the hero model. I get to feel very good about myself because every day there's somebody who tells me something terrible. I tell them how to fix it. They tell me, oh, you're a superhero, you're a saint, you're Brie Larson. Wired writes up an article about me. Fast Company writes up an article about me. I look out into the distance like a thought leader, very dramatically lit. But the hero model is bullshit. Being a hero is very satisfying, but it doesn't scale. And so I spent some time thinking about what I could do that would help more than the people that knew to contact me directly, and more than one at a time. Because helping one person at a time is extremely satisfying, but a really good way to end up burnt out. And not do, I don't know, the rest of my job. So I engaged in some thought leadership. So I have advice for people with compromised accounts, but the worst abuses that I'm seeing are the result of compromised devices, mostly Android phones running spouseware and stalkerware. They were giving away people's locations, the contents of their emails, their text messages, their WhatsApp messages, photos, Snapchats, Instas, their web browsing searches. The contents of a phone are really revealing. Searching somebody's phone is the next best thing to having access to the contents of their mind. This is one of the reasons why APTs find compromising phones so great for intel. And this is also the reason why abusers think that compromising the phones of their former partners or of their victims will get them so much. So this leads us to the next question, which is, so how do I know it's spouseware? The good news is that it's much easier to find spouseware than it is to find a state actor's malware. You can just go to Google and search for it. I am, as I've pointed out before, extremely lazy. And so I was excited to discover that I could just search for this stuff and pull down sample after sample after sample. So this is the results of a search for how do I spy on my girlfriend's phone. It's pretty straightforward. You just click on all the links, download a bunch of packages. So again, how do I know it's spouseware? They will tell you. This is from Coco Spy's advertising copy. Access to Coco Spy gives you the lead on how to spy on your wife with ease. You don't have to worry about where she goes, who she talks to, or the websites that she visits, or have an actual conversation with her about your relationship. And just in case you didn't think that was creepy enough, oh, don't worry. The creepiness goes up to 11. So this is a screenshot from Mobile Spy. Mobile Spy is a spy app for personal catch cheating spouses. This is a lengthy paragraph about how common cheating is in relationships and why cheating is very bad. And this is a photo of a man who is beating his female partner, and there is blood on her face. Now, let's be clear. In this photo, Coco Spy is on the side of the abuser. They want you to be that guy doing that to this woman, and they're selling you a product in order to help make that happen. So, that brings us to this guy, Jean-Pierre Lesueur. There is actually not a big difference between sort of free, easily available rats and stalkerware or spouseware. Jean-Pierre Lesueur was a hacker who went by the name of the Dark Comet Coder. He made Dark Comet Rat, which you may or may not be familiar with. It was cheap, it was easy, it was ubiquitous, and I spent many years tracking the use of Dark Comet by a group of pro-Assad Syrian hackers who are using it to target opponents of the Assad government. Now, when Jean-Pierre Lesueur read these reports and his work became synonymous with tracking Syrian activists, he shut the project down. And one of the things that he said was essentially, listen, when I built this thing, I thought guys were just going to use it to spy on their girlfriends. It didn't occur to me that it was going to be used by, murderous hackers in order to send, innocent dissidents to torture camps. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be shutting this project down. What is implied here is that guys spying on their girlfriends using this rat is perfectly fine. And that is really the notion that we need to change. That is really the most important thing. Interestingly enough, the Wired coverage of Jean-Pierre Lesueur's decision to shut down Dark Comet was hilariously sympathetic. The title of the column, the story that Wired wrote about it, was "How the Boy Next Door Accidentally Built a Syrian Spy Tool." Sure, he accidentally built a Syrian spy tool, but he deliberately built spouseware and stalkerware. He's not the boy next door. He's not a good guy. If you see this guy, tell him I'm looking for him. So again, how do you know it's spouseware? How do you know that the software that you're looking at is not just some sort of innocent, keep track of your kids, keep track of, everybody in your family so that you know whether or not your partner is going to be late for dinner kind of situations. And the key here is deception. Spouseware and stalkerware is designed to run invisibly on the victim's device. And so if the program runs invisibly, you can't give consent. Even if, in order to install the program, you need to have the username and password. And up until recently, most of the companies that I talked to, including most AV and security companies, would tell me that if you have the login credentials, you have legitimate access to the device. And my reply to them was, I have some news for you about how abuse works. It was extremely common to see abusers convince their victims to hand over their login credentials. In fact, this sort of behavior was routine. And that's why we really need to rethink our definition of this stuff. So I did a little research. I went and downloaded all of the most common spouseware and stalkerware. Again, very easy because all you have to do is search for it on the internet. Then I ran the packages through VirusTotal. Almost immediately, I think just same day checking, and I discovered that the pickup was very low. These are my results from, I think, back in April. Right here, I think this is a result for the Truth Spy, showing that only 7 out of 60 AV products were accurately recognizing this product as malicious. Here is another one. We were seeing 10 out of 61. Again, not very good. And what this means is that even if you had the Truth Spy on your phone, maliciously installed by an abusive partner, and you had AV on your phone, it still wouldn't pick it up. So that's useless. So back in April, I managed to convince Kaspersky to start taking stalkerware and spouseware more seriously. And what they did was they added this sort of capability to their product. If you download the Kaspersky, mobile AV. Now, if they run into any of the stalkerware or spouseware, you will get this message right here, a privacy alert letting you know that, that this stuff is malicious and bad and offering to remove it. Now, it does not remove it automatically. One of the reasons for this is the way that abuse works. It turns out that there are situations in which alerting your abuser to knowing that you are being watched or taking steps to thwart them can sometimes lead them to escalate to greater violence. And I really want to leave it up to the target, to the victim, the survivor, to decide what their appetite for risk is instead of making decisions for them. Because if there's one thing that I have learned over the course of this project, it is that every assumption I made about who was the victim, about what they needed, about what needed to be done, and about what was helpful turned out to be wrong. So the more power that you give them to make their own decisions, the better. Additionally, Lookout put out a blog post saying essentially, oh, we have always done this. We have always taken spouseware and stalkerware very seriously, and you can download Lookout, and it will find all of this stuff for you. Yay! So 2 down, 60 something to go. So there's still some work to do. But it is my understanding that the AV industry has really started to pay attention, and they are looking at adding this sort of capability to their products, which is really cool because now I will be able to tell people just download Antivirus and you will know whether or not there's spouseware or stalkerware on your device. So again, what can Antivirus do? Antivirus can start detecting spouseware and stalkerware, label it as malicious, and stay on top of it. There are also a few things that Google can do. Google could do a better job of policing the Google Play Store. Right now, spouseware and stalkerware, in the manner that I describe it, stuff which is designed to run invisibly to the user on your device, is not allowed under the Google Play Store's policies. But sometimes this stuff sneaks in anyway, so Google should really stay on top of it. You may also ask yourself, what can developers do? One of the things that developers can do, no matter what product they're building, is make it easier to rule out a rat and pin down actual account compromise. And you could do this by having one page or tab where the user can see all of the accounts that have access to the data and which data they have access to. You can have one page or tab that allows users to see devices and IP addresses that have recently logged into their account. And of course, support 2FA. Again, preferably something stronger than SMS. I would really, really like to see the normalization of not just 2FA, but the strongest level of 2FA that you can really convince users to accept. Which leads us to the next question, what can governments do? So I'm a little skeptical of authority. Governments, I know that this is going to come as a terrible surprise to everybody in this room. And so when faced with a problem, frequently people say, there ought to be a law. And when I hear there ought to be a law, I become very suspicious. So let's start by looking at the laws that already exist. The following is a US legal analysis because I have a floor of angry US barred attack lawyers in my office, and I do not have a floor of angry Israeli barred lawyers. This is a sort of project for anybody who is listening to this talk. If you are an attorney, a analysis of the laws that these programs are breaking in your country would be extremely welcome. Recently, Citizen Lab put out their own legal analysis of the laws which are being broken in Canada by these companies. So there's room for everybody. Let 1,000 angry lawyers bloom and write analyses. So, US law, and we will go through this fairly quickly because I imagine US law is not terribly interesting to you. There are some federal laws that are being broken, including the Federal Wiretap Act, the Stored Communications Act, and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. I am extremely hesitant to use the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act because frequently the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is the law under which most hackers are prosecuted, and it's extremely broad. But there are definitely cases in the use of spyware and stalkerware where it's not a broad reading of the law to go after them. So the Federal Wiretap Act prohibits the manufacture, distribution, possession, and advertising of certain intercepting devices. It's not limited to the developers of spyware. The FWA's prohibitions are quite broad, generally covering the devices that are primarily useful for the purpose of surreptitious interception, not just illegal surreptitious interception. And as a result, even the surreptitious monitoring of children, which may be legal, advertising it may still be illegal. And as you can see, we've had the government go after a company called Stealth Genie for this very reason, and they were violating the FWA, the Federal Wiretapping Act. You can also call in the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. In 2012, the FTC charged Designerware LLC, a company that provided spyware to rent-to-own computer owners, and entered into a consent decree with the company agreeing not to collect data from computers without giving clear and prominent notice and obtaining affirmative consent. We also have state laws. One of the most annoying things about US law is that we have laws for, we have federal laws and then we have state laws. And we have 50 states with 50 different laws for greater confusion. And almost every state, I believe, has its own wiretapping statute. Some of the states have what we call two-party consent wiretapping laws, which is to say that in states such as California and Maryland, you cannot record a conversation which is happening between two people without the consent of both people, which makes spyware and stalkerware that records your conversations de facto illegal, because the person who has the stuff installed on their phone was not able to consent. They don't know it's on there. But also the person that they're talking to is not able to consent because they're not able to ask them for consent. There's also the Consumer Protection Against Consumer Spyware Act, a awkwardly named California law that is specifically designed for the purpose of going after spyware. So again, the tools exist. This is not a situation where we need new laws. What we need is for the Department of Justice and for state attorneys general to start enforcing the laws that already exist. And we need to see greater analysis all over the world of the laws that are being broken in other countries, because the internet is global, and spouseware and stalkerware and abuse are global, and it's not just limited to the United States. So the more lawyers that I can throw at this problem, the better. And finally, I just want to remind everybody that I didn't invent the terms stalkerware or spouseware. I don't do this work in a vacuum. It is only possible for me to do this work because so many people did research before me. That includes the journalists at Motherboard, who have a series called When Spies Come Home, who did a lot of the research that my work is based on. Thomas Brewster at Forbes did a lot of this work. Chris Cox has done an enormous amount of work. Harlow Holmes, who works for the Freedom of Press Foundation, has been doing a lot of the sort of one-on-one hero work that I was talking about earlier, helping women individually. And without them, I would have essentially had to reinvent the wheel. I'd also like to give a shout out to Citizen Lab for their Canadian analysis of the laws that are already being broken. I think that stuff is extremely important. And I would like to give a shout out to Dave Moss and Cooper Quinton, who are my coworkers at EFF's Threat Lab, who supported me all through my research. And last of all, I want to give a shout out to you guys, because somebody has to build on this research. Somebody's going to have to do the legal analysis. Somebody's going to have to go and make the cases at the AV companies. Somebody's going to have to show up when somebody makes a new product and say, well, let's talk about the domestic abuse case. And what I'm hoping is that it's going to be you. Thank you very much.